Kat, and I'm back because what once was will be again. I got my thinking cap on because we are really going to use history, mythology, and astrology to divine some mysteries of the Game of Thrones. Or maybe really complicate matters a little bit. So, we're going to talk about a red comet. Because in all of the prophecies that we're going to talk about in the near future, and Jon Snow's parentage and or the prince that was promised, whatever, there's a red comet. There's a red comet in our story, and there's a red comet that occurs throughout mythology as well as history that plays along with our story in A Song of Ice and Fire or Game of Thrones, whichever you prefer. So let's talk about the red comet in our story. Our red comet appears at least twice written in the story. It may actually have appeared some other times, we just don't know about it. The first time it's said to have appeared was on the night that Aegon, Prince Rhaegar's son, was conceived. In the books, John Connington, who is acting as Aegon the imposter, we're going to assume he's the imposter right at this moment, guardian, he tells him the story that he was in fact conceived on the night that the red comet appeared in the sky. Now, when was this? Probably had to be late 281, early 282, because we know that, at least in the story, if John Connington's trying to tell it as if it was true, that Aegon was born in that time period because he was still a baby suckling at his mother's breast when the sack of King's Landing occurred. And Rhaegar Clegane kicked down the door and then smashed his brains against the wall. And since he hasn't appeared in the Game of Thrones and they've cut him out as a character, I'm going to assume that he was really an imposter and they decided it didn't further the story any. Bummer. Is that a spoiler? Sorry. Okay. So we know also that Rhaegar knew about this red comet. I believe that we know he knew about it because at one time Rhaegar believed that he was the prince that was promised, and then we hear Maester Yandel say later that Rhaegar changed his mind. There was something that changed his mind. Well, what changed his mind? There's probably something he read, and I'm going to assume it's this red comet. Because there was no red comet recorded prior to his birth or on the night of his birth. And in fact, he believes that he has read that in some prophecy, and Rhaegar has some parts of the prophecy, by the way, and or story, and he's got parts of it right, but he got a lot of it wrong. He got parts of it wrong, and it ended up killing him, by the way, being the cause of his death. But in any event, we know that Daenerys has a vision of Rhaegar in a room with, we assume, his wife, Elia Martell, holding a baby, and Rhaegar says his name will be Aegon, because it's a fitting name for a king. And then she says, will you write him a song? And Rhaegar says he already has a song. He's a song of ice and fire. He's the prince that was promised. So obviously he understood certain aspects of our story. And in fact, he didn't coin a song of ice and fire. He actually read that in history. And we'll get to that. So, and my thoughts are that since Rhaegar seemed to be single-mindedly going after this prophecy, that he may in fact have worked to conceive this child under the red comet, because we know that Elia Martell was said to have been somewhat delicate of health after the birth of their daughter Rhaenys, which had occurred not too long before, and then all of a sudden we have another child. And thereafter, when he was born, somewhere probably in 282, that she could no longer have any children, which, by the way, means that that was after the events in Harrenhal, at the Harrenhal tourney, which means that could not have been Rhaegar's original intent in giving our friend Lyanna Stark a circlet of roses. So keep that in mind. Okay, but moving right along, because there's some other parts to this story. Daenerys then, of course, maybe something like 17 years later, is in the desert. She's building the funeral pyre for Khal Drogo. She puts the eggs on there. There is a red comet going across the sky. She believes it's a portender of the dragons. That's what they're all talking about, the dragons. It means the dragons will be born. And sure enough, she goes into the fire and her 3 dragons are born. Over in Westeros, a lot of other people saw this, and they had a lot of different takes on what it meant. The Red Messenger. It's the dragons, boy. Nan tells Bran it just means the dragons. Osha says it's blood. It just means blood. And then Joffrey's name day, this same comet is still appearing and or has appeared. And Sansa points it out, and one of the other knights says, oh, it just means that he is going to defeat his enemies and he's going to be victorious and have a great rule. Wrong! He croaked in a very bad way. Okay, so all across, people interpret it either as good or bad. Right? Well, in mythology, this red comet appears also in a story, of course, of a prince that was promised. And you're probably familiar with it or know what's coming up. It is the King Arthur story, the Merlin Vulgates, the Merlin cycle. So, and in our story, Merlin is hanging out in his cave or in a tree, and he sees this comet going by, and he thinks it looks like a dragon. He believes it is a omen or portender for the coming of the king that will unite the English dukedoms and bring peace finally to the kingdom. But he believes it looks like a dragon, so he believes he needs to go find a dragon. He goes and finds this dragon, Uther Pendragon, the head of dragons, who's at war with the Duke of Cornwall. And Uther Pendragon asks Merlin to glamour him so he can climb in the castle and cuckold the Duke of Cornwall with his wife, Igraine. And in fact, impregnates her with future King Arthur. The Duke of Cornwall died shortly afterwards. And I guess we can assume King Arthur inherited the dukedom of Cornwall and then went on to be the once and future king. But we're going to stop there because there's so much Arthurian legend to go through. I just wanted to point out that the red comet was the portender for the prince that was promised, the once and future king. Because then this red comet in real history reflects real history that is reflected in our story of a Game of Thrones or a Song of Ice and Fire. So in real history, the two events that are most reflected within this story are first, 1066, the invasion of England by William the Conqueror. In 1066, Halley's Comet is seen going through the sky. Harold Godwinson, at that point, was declared the King of England, but he was being attacked from two sides, and when he saw this comet, he believed it was an ill omen. And hey, he turned out to be right, because at the Battle of Hastings, he took an arrow to the eye and then was hacked to pieces, literally hacked to pieces on the battlefield. Now, over on the other side in Normandy, before they came over, William the Conqueror's group saw this comet as well, and most of them believed it was a poor omen. But William the Conqueror was a much stronger personality, and he insisted it was a sign of victory. Even though a couple days later, a big storm blew up and prevented them from going when they needed to, portentously, as it turned out. He insisted still that it was a good omen. They got on their ships, and sure enough, he won at the Battle of Hastings. You know, it's that 50-50 thing. In fact, that it became so important in the story that it was included on the Bayeux's tapestry that shows the entire battle from beginning to end. It's like the longest tapestry ever created. Okay, and that is reflected, everybody believes, by the conquest of Aegon the Conqueror and his two sister wives 300 years previously. And even maybe there was a comet, but I didn't see that written. I wouldn't be surprised. Well, there is a second character that's currently playing out right now. There's a current character that is playing a historical figure in which this red comet, in fact, plays a part. Halley's Comet appeared in the sky in 1456, the year that Henry Tudor was conceived. So if you've watched my other videos, you know that Mr. Martin has used the War of the Roses as a background, and that in fact the upcoming get-together of Jon and Daenerys reflects the joining of Henry Tudor and Elizabeth of York who ended the War of Roses. Now, Mr. Martin has played around with their historical aspects, giving some aspects, events to Daenerys, even though she's a female, and giving some aspects to Jon Snow. And you could go catch that in the Battle of the Bastards in the beginning, and a couple other videos that I'll link down below, and you could go see how he's mixed that up. But in 1456, Henry Tudor was conceived, and he was born in January of 1457. And in fact, speaking of King Arthur, and you can catch the other videos, he did believe and or cause to have made a family tree that showed that he was descended from the High Kings of Wales, including King Arthur, the once and future king. And then he named his first son, Prince Arthur. And that's a little sadder story. But in any event, so think about which one of those, since Mr. Martin likes to mix them up, and Aegon had his brains dashed out against the wall underneath, and he was born under the Red Comet, or conceived under the Red Comet. That means one of the other two also, and or both, had to be conceived under the Red Comet. Sometime in early 282, 281. It can't be 281 because then that would mess up Lyanna Stark or others. I mean, I could be just pulling that straight out of my hat, but since he used Venus and he's used this comet in other sections of the story, I don't see that as a fake out. So somebody else was conceived during the time of the Red Comet. Didn't have to be the first night it was in the sky, but sometime in those couple of months. And that means that if it was Lyanna Stark, Rhaegar Targaryen was probably not it. Because he was busy conceiving somebody. He was conceiving his own child, and his child hadn't been born until some other time in 282, so he wouldn't know yet that Elia Martell couldn't have any more children. So this whole theory that he kidnapped Lyanna Stark in order to have another baby mama, just because she couldn't have any more children and the dragon needed 3 heads, I just think is wrong. Because somebody was conceived beneath the Red Comet, or sometime shortly after that. In any event, or it's Daenerys and somebody's been lying about her age this whole time. Because he likes to mix it up. Okay, well, there's your historical aspects for the Red Comet. Thank you very much. Hit the like button. I'll talk to you later.